Burning Issy, Melvin Burgess, Chapter 15. Once before, Iron had to leave her home and flee. Now the time had come again. Things had been getting dangerous for some time, and with the arrival of Baldwin and what I'd already done to him, the danger was very close. Tolly wanted to shut up shop and disappear overnight, but Iron was too much a businesswoman to do that. If she left now, she would leave a great deal of her money tied up, not to mention leaving many of her weavers with pieces of cloth they had no way of selling. She only needed a couple more weeks to close the business down. Tolly looked grim and shook his head, but she wouldn't be moved. They still have no evidence, she argued. What's he to say? That a 12-year-old girl picked up his horse and flung him down on his backside? She gurgled delightedly at the thought of Baldwin admitting to that indignity. He'll not get a warrant like that. As for me, I was filled with a sense of danger closing in around me, but from where did the danger come? From Baldwin, of course, but I did not forget what I'd been taught all my life about witches in Hellfire. Parson Holden would never help me after what I'd done. To go back to Pendle was suicide for me and deadly to Nat and Gil. There was nowhere for me. At last something happened that brought the whole matter to a head. It began with a little silly thing, for some reason frightened me where everything else had not really mattered. It was a Monday afternoon, just a week before the pack horses were due to leave. Since we'd decided to abandon the house, we'd let the garden run wild. The weeds lost no time in jumping over the fence and getting rooted in the rich, cultivated soil. Now Iron no longer forbade them. They were really making up for lost time, and by the end of the week, the whole garden was covered with a carpet of dandelions, shepherd's purse and forget-me-nots about a centimetre high. The weeds got terribly excited, and it became a very odd experience just walking up the garden path. Things were going on everywhere. You felt the garden was so infested it wanted to jump up and give itself a good shake. On this particular afternoon, I was wandering about when I heard a strange sound coming from behind one of the little sheds littered around the garden. I kept up to it and peered round. There was one of Iron's cats sitting in the sun on the wooden steps leading up to the shed door. It was crying. The poor thing must have been crying for some time, because there were splashes of wet on the wood between its paws and the fur and its face, and it was soaked. It kept licking its face, trying to wipe the tears away with its paws, but it wasn't getting very far with it. The mews were coming out all wrong, all mixed up with tears and sobs and little cries, and it kept shaking its head and moaning and rubbing its eyes. It just couldn't stop. I stood and stared for maybe a minute until I made a little noise and the cat looked up and saw me. It jumped up in surprise and ran down the steps behind the shed. I peered round after it and glanced just in time to see it throw me a piercing glance before it disappeared into the house. I had a strange impression it was going to tell Iron what had just happened. Straight away I thought of Demdike's imp Tib. Cats don't cry, I thought to myself. The things in the garden had been impressions in the shadows, half seen, half imagined, but this was real, and cats don't cry. Later on, Iron said she'd taken the kittens away to be drowned. Since we were all leaving, there would be no one to look after them, and it seemed the kindest thing to do. You see how it is with us, she added. We help things to know what they are, to know themselves. The cat as well as you. She lost her kittens and she's sad about it. Why shouldn't she be sad? I couldn't speak to them properly after that. I found myself avoiding their company. Once when Ahern tried to touch me, I shrank away without meaning to. She looked queerly at me and asked what was wrong, but I just shrugged and left before she could press me. Fortunately, both she and Tolly were so busy I was able to keep myself up until bedtime. Cats don't cry. I had to stop trusting her. Cats don't cry. I no longer knew if she was good or bad. There was one way to get to the truth. In 2 days' time it was the Sabbath. I would go along and see for myself. As usual, we had supper early on Thursday night. This was the high spot of Ahern's week, and as soon as the meal was over, she disappeared into one of her little sheds to get herself ready. Tolly vanished too, to get ready in his way. This was the first time they'd made no secret of what they were doing, and I was curious to see how they prepared themselves. Tolly managed to slip away early, so I never saw him get ready for service. When Ahern came out, she was brushed and washed and moist-eyed with excitement. She had her hair tied up behind and was wearing a black linen robe with a hood, black, to help her hide in the dark if she had to, she claimed. Despite the colour, she reminded me of nothing so much of a bride. She had a little silver brooch shaped like a horned moon and asked me to fix it on her breast. She was chattering away like a girl the whole time about how much she was looking forward to it, how glorious it was, and what fun they had, and how much better it was in every way than the dull lecturing church services. And she kept giggling and laughing, that wonderful gurgling laugh of hers, as if it was the best fun in the world. "You'll see for yourself one day," she promised as she kissed me goodbye by the gate. "Can't you feel it? Even the trees and the fields are excited because they know he's coming tonight. The moss and the seeds and the buds know they are loved and needed to have a place on earth, especially of their own. I know you'll love him, Issy, when you see him for yourself." She stroked my cheek, kissed me, and then ran off into the darkness under the trees. I waited a few seconds and followed quietly behind her. It was a dark April night, still, cold and damp. There was a silver moon, very high and white, floating like a bowl above the trees. It shed little light, and I could barely make out Ahern as she moved quickly and quietly among the trees and the bushes beyond the garden. Her way led her through the trees behind our house up to the valley moor above us. Up there, where the sky was open, she became easier to follow, as I could see her outlined against the sky. We travelled for a mile or so before we began to descend, and I heard voices. Another figure passed close by me. I lay down in the grass to let them pass. There was more voices, and a few minutes later flames flickered in a hollow below. Figures were gathering around the fire. I saw Ahern throw off her hood. Here was the Sabbath. The witches came to the fire out of the darkness. I recognised several of Ahern's neighbours and customers among them. Maybe a dozen or so milled about the fire. Then there was a drum and the whiners and pipe music, and the worshippers began to dance. It was like no religious service I'd ever seen. There were no words, just excited rhythms of music whipping across the moor, and the robed dancers moving about the fire, moving in and out of each other's arms. There was laughter and shouting as they whirled faster and faster. I could imagine what Parson Holden would make of this worship, although it seemed all in good spirits, like a party or a festival rather than a service. The dancers stamped and clapped their hands and shouted in time to the music. They began to whirl and dance with a fierce energy. More drums joined in. The pace grew hotter and louder and faster until the air was full of noise, of shouting, of drum beats, of clapping and stamping and whooping people. And at that moment, there stepped from behind the fire a horned figure. The world turned red in front of my eyes. It was all lies. She was nothing but lies. This was her God. This was the one she ran to like a girl bride. I felt a jabbing pain of that candle end Parson Holden had pushed against my wrist, and the words, Hellfire. This is what it feels like forever and ever and ever. I began to shake and my hands came up to my face. I told myself, don't look, don't look. He will know, he will see you. It's a sin even to look at him. But I couldn't drag my eyes away. The witch's chorus rose into a shrieking crescendo. I saw Iron, her face flushed, her mouth wide open as she beat her hands together. The horned man lifted his arms as they cried out to him, and then rushed in among them, dashing at them with his horns, spinning on his heels, roaring like a bull. They screamed and yelled and danced furiously around him, taunting him to come and touch them with his great horns. They ran up to embrace or kiss his shoulder or his back or stroke him, love him. And then at last I saw Iron jump up on his back and plant a kiss on the base of his pale brown horn where it spouted out from his temple. I screamed. The scream came from my soul, and I could never have stopped it. There was so much noise, but someone heard me. I saw them turn up and look. The music faltered. I was still standing. He turned, his deformed head sweeping those great horns round, and I saw his arm lift to point at me. He knew. He had me. I was forever. I was his forever in his hell. Sorry. This was the one Iron told me I should come to love. This, there was no mistaking, was the devil. End of chapter 15.